You're listening to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast, home of the 2-hour deep dive interview with gold, platinum, and multi-platinum bands, including Stained, Blue Rodeo, The Arkells, Finger 11, Big Wreck, Moist, Bedouin Soundclash, I Mother Earth, Ill Scarlet, Neverending White Lights, Thornley, and many more. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, as well as share, comment, and like. Now let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast. Thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. We are joined by a very special guest. He's achieved a level of mastery as the bass player for the Juno-nominated and platinum-selling band, The Watchmen, as well as the gold-selling band, Thornley. He's also a prolific singer-songwriter, having released many solo albums. So welcome to the podcast, Ken Tizzard. Ken, how are you? And how was last night's Whiskey Wednesday show? You had a special guest, I saw.
Yeah, we did last night, and thanks for having me on the show here today, Joel. Last week we had Del Barber on from Manitoba, he sang a couple songs, and we had an interview, and it turned out to be when I do the Whiskey Wednesday show, I don't really sort of format it too much. My interview segment started as a thing called "What are you at?" What are you at's a Newfoundland term or phrase that you know if you see somebody on the street or if you call them up on the phone, you say, "What are you at?" On the show, I started calling people, artistic directors and friends of mine and stuff, and sort of having a speaker conversation with them on online, and people thought it was really funny. So it kind of turned into an interview thing, but it's more of just kind of a chat, very much like this. I don't really get into, any sort of big pinpointed questions based on, new releases and stuff. It's just kind of a, what are you doing and how you been? And Del was great because, we talked about everything from farming and fishing. Music was, even when we talked about music, it was sort of not the usual stuff we talked about. So I love doing the interviews. It's a weird thing to do to switch the role, from being a musician who's been on the other side of the table for so many years. But I've also enjoyed those conversational interviews. Those have been the best ones that I've ever done. So, yeah. But the Whiskey Wednesday show was great, and Del was fantastic. And, we played a bunch of tunes and told some stories, and it was great. So nice way to kill 90 minutes every week.
Yeah, you mentioned to me that there was so much good content there that there'll actually be a part 2 released.
Next week will be part 2 of Del Barber. Yeah, we got another 2 songs from him and another 15 or 20 minutes of interview. So I think we talk a lot about fishing in the next part. So it's always interesting.
And did this start during the pandemic, like where most people started new projects, or did this predate that?
So I guess almost 15 years ago now, I was really interested in the idea of having a residency, playing somewhere every week, and learning a bunch of cover tunes. I'd never learned cover tunes really, because I played in a punk band when I was a kid, and it was all original. And then I came to Toronto, and it was all original acts. And then I became really interested in writing and wrote for years. And then the Watchmen, Thornley, and before I knew it, I was sort of in my 40s, and I really hadn't learned any cover songs aside from the stuff that I learned bass lines for, when I was a kid, when I was learning how to play bass. So I wanted to have a place where I could just go and do that. So there was a place in town at the time. It was called the Stinking Rose Pub. Has a capacity of 24 people. And that includes the staff, which is 1.
Is that in Campbellford?
That's in Campbellford, yeah.
Who's the staff name? What's the guy's name?
Well, at the time it was Janet. Janet was the bartender there. So I used to go down on Wednesday nights and drink with Janet and John. John was the owner. And Wednesdays was kind of, just a locals night. There might be 3 or 4 people around.
I've played Campbellford one time in my life, and it was at the Stinking Rose. That's why I'm asking.
Rose, yeah. Exactly.
It was a guy. I can't remember the guy's name, but it was a really nice guy that was in charge.
It might have been Lucas or Mark. It went through a few different people over the years. So I started going there every Wednesday and just playing. And then eventually, I said to the owner, why don't we get a PA in here, start doing some music. So we had a fundraiser and we got PA in, and then I did the same thing next door. We got a PA in there. And then before I knew it, there was all this stuff happening in town. But the crux of it being that became Whiskey Wednesday. That was my night to go and drink with local friends and play a bunch of tunes. People would call out covers. I'd look them up on my phone and, stumble through them and, just have a good time. And then when the Corona thing, the pandemic kind of led me to experiment with doing it online. One night I was sitting home with my daughter, Caitlin, and I said, how do you do this Facebook Live thing? And she said, well, you just sit there and I hold the phone and I press record. And I said, there's got to be more to it than that. So we tried it on a Wednesday night and a lot of people tuned in. I was blown away by the response. So we did it again the next week. And I thought, this is kind of cool. I'd always had a fear of the perpetual nature of video online. Like when even playing live, I hate it when I see somebody with their phone right in front of me because I know that the mistakes that are going to happen are there forever. And then all of a sudden the moment gets lost and it's sort of a weird thing. But anyways, that's, the Whiskey Wednesday thing has just been developing over years and years and years. And now it's something that I do all the time. I still go out and do a few Watchmen shows and I do a little bit of solo shows. I spend most of my time at home. My wife is still in recovery, has been for a few years. So it's been a few years that I've been sort of unable to tour. So the Whiskey Wednesday show has been a great way to fill that void for me too, to just play music and connect every week with people.
So for our listeners that want to check it out in the future, it's every Wednesday at 8:00. They can tune in on your Facebook page. And then if they don't catch it on the night of, you do a little editing and then it comes out on YouTube the next day.
Yeah. So, well, it goes live to YouTube as well. So it broadcasts live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter and all the other things if you follow. And then, the next day I spend the day editing, with the Cam interview, there'll be, segments of each of the songs plus Cam, the 10-minute interview portion plus the full show. And I'll edit those and I'll put them back up. But the original show, the live show, exists in its mistaken form every week with lots of great outtake material.
Perfect. I have to ask. So I've had a guest in the past. So Chris Gormley, the drummer for the Trews. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he during the pandemic, he became the whiskey hunter, and he has a show that he's out there finding the best whiskeys in the world, and it's quite popular, and he writes songs just about whiskey, which is funny. So I thought you guys should team up and have the whiskey hunter on the Whiskey Wednesday. I
should actually reach out to Chris on that. Yeah, he's a great guy. I will do that, actually. That's very good.
Yeah, I feel like it would be compounding the whiskiness. I feel like you guys deserve each other or something.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And like I say, he's a fantastic guy too. So yeah.
Awesome. So I'd like to start these interviews by sharing with our listeners how the guests and I know each other. In the music industry, entertainment industry, it's all about networking and building communities and fostering relationships. So in our case, a year ago, you were kind enough to provide quotes for Sekou and Clayton Bellamy. That was the start of us communicating. You said some kind words for those guys. We got them right in the feels. They appreciated it. So I wanted to start by saying thank you for doing that, supporting the podcast. It means a lot. And next up is I recently had Kevin Young on the podcast from Moist. And when I finish an interview, I always ask them privately, hey, can you think of anyone that would make for an amazing guest in the future? And he had one name and one name only, and it was Ken Tizzard. So he put out the bat signal, you responded, and here we are. So that's how we ended up here today.
Very cool. Yeah, we've been sort of on each other's radars for a while, so it's nice to be on the show. And thanks to Kevin for giving me the call on that. Yeah, he's a real sweet guy. We did some work after when I was doing some of my original 6-string bass solo project. I had him and a drummer working with me for a couple shows, and we became good buddies back then. He's a nice guy.
So I wouldn't be doing my job here if I didn't reach out and get some kind words from Kevin Young. So Kevin writes in and he says, the first time I played with Ken was a gig with Kim Bingham. Later, he asked me to do a gig in a theater near his home for his debut solo release. Ken's an inspiration to me, not only because of his dedication to his craft, but his sensitivity and candor as a human. Every gig teaches me something about how to become a better musician. The shows I played with Ken also taught me something about how to be a better person. He's one of a kind. So that's from Kevin Young.
Wow, those are some pretty heavy words. Wow, thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, I've had the good fortune to work with amazing people in my life. Kevin being one of them. And I remember that first show that we did together for the CD release. We were actually on our way down to the Elmo Combo to play on Thursday night. And it was me and Kevin and Mike. We were on our way and there was a massive snowstorm. And I thought, oh, is the Elmo going to be closed? This kind of sucks. And we were having breakfast and Now Magazine had just come out and they had done a review of my album. This was the first piece of information, of feedback I'd gotten from the world. And the review said, dude can't sing. And it was 1 star. And I remember just sitting at breakfast with Mike and Kevin, and I was just kind of choking down. I was like, holy fuck, guys. Like this Now Magazine review is not at all cool. And at the same time, I got the call from Yvonne, and she said, we're not opening the ultrasound tonight. Not the ultrasound, the Elmo. And she said the storm's too bad. So we all headed back out of the city. So that would have been Kevin's first morning of that was before we had even done a show. We did several shows after. So it's neat that he learned something. Maybe it was maybe it was watching an artist receive bad news and how to react to it. But I remember that quite clearly.
It's all uphill from that day,
Absolutely.
Yeah. They say rock bottom is a solid foundation upon which to build a life. So that was that day for you.
That was that day. I will never forget. I will never forget that feeling when I opened it up and I read that review. That was wild.
Man, what's funny is, when I talk to all these artists, I mean, some of them have sold 5, 10, 15 million albums. And I share, I dig up old reviews, like old positive reviews from when they released their debut albums and all this stuff. And all of them are like, where were these quotes when we came out? I only remember the negative ones. So unfortunately, that's the way we work.
It's very true. Yeah.
So people look at you now and they see you as a successful musician in these different projects, but you weren't born insanely talented. I mean, you had to learn your craft. You have to put in the hours and lessons and struggles and all these things. So let's take it all the way back to the beginning. Where does this love of music come from? Is there maybe an earliest musical memory that comes to you when you think back?
Well, I grew up, music for me was partly an escape from a place, as a kid growing up with a father who was an alcoholic, and a mother who was trying to hold a family together while balancing a younger sister and an older sister. I remember Dad was always kind of, sitting by the fireplace, and he had one of those wing-back chairs, and always a bottle on the floor, and he would always be listening to old country, the old sort of really kind of cheesy stuff that I quite love to this day, Marty Robbins and stuff like that. But I never really felt like that music did anything for me. But when I became sort of in my early teenage years, I had been, of course, been exposed to what was on the radio, which at the time was, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden. Like, this was the early 80s, late 70s. Rock was getting harder, and commercial music was getting more and more sounding the same. And it had a sound that I liked. I liked the Def Leppard stuff I was hearing on the radio. I liked the Iron Maiden. I liked the Judas Priest. But discovered a group of people in St. John's, Newfoundland, that were listening to early 80s punk music. I was sucked in a way that I'd never before felt, and I wanted to play music. I got my first bass which I actually thought was a guitar. I didn't know there was a difference. There was no internet.
It had strings. That's all you knew.
I knew it had strings. I plugged it into an amp. It made noise. After a while, I figured out what it was, and started playing music with my friends. And I'll tell you, the night that music changed for me, aside from the fact that I knew I loved it, in a world where there was a lot that I didn't love, having something that I loved and was very passionate about, skateboarding and music, those two things together. And I belonged to a group of people in St. John's, and there was a bunch of little punk bands playing, and a few of the punk bands kind of collectively got together, and we'd pool our money all year, and then we'd bring a band down. Brought down DOA, SNFU, and Deja Voodoo over a couple of years. And I remember the SNFU show. We had it booked at some place. The owners or the management found out what it was happening, a punk rock show with 200 punk rock kids and a band from Vancouver. And they went, no, this is not happening here. So we ended off finding an abandoned apartment building that somebody had access to. And we brought the band in there and set up a makeshift PA and crammed however many kids we could get into this, living room, kitchen sort of area. And SNFU played, and myself and some of my friends, Clark Hancock, Danny Thomas, Mike Bueller, Chris Jarrett, we all sort of got up to the front and kind of locked arms, sort of like rugby players would, with our back to the crowd and the audience right in front of us. So we were kind of the barricade. So all night people were kind of stage diving, but using our shoulders to sort of kick off back into the crowd. But I ended off right in front of the bass player's bass amp. He had an Ampeg SVT. And it was the first time I'd ever heard an 810, and being 6 feet away from it is the perfect place to sort of just hear that amazing tone. And that show that night, I just remember watching it and going, this is what I want. I want to be a part of this chaos that's happening right now. I want to do it from the point of view of that guy right there who's playing bass. That's where I want to be. And that was it. That there's been nothing else ever since. The choice of instrument has changed, the choice of venue has changed, the choice of people around me has changed, and that will always change. But the reality is, it's it was an escape that took me to a place that has guided me through my life. So.
And at what point did the guitar playing kick in, the songwriting, the singing? You started with bass. Where does everything else round out?
Well, I started with bass, and I wrote songs on bass. I was a firm believer that bass could do everything. It's just sort of the bass player's illusion. We all feel that, you can do everything with a bass, and you can do a lot of stuff with bass. But eventually, it wasn't until maybe a decade or so ago that I started to actually say, I need to learn some more chords on the guitar and learn some ways of playing. I inherited, I didn't inherit, I worked really hard to learn some Travis picking and some flat picking and some thumb picking, and these different styles of playing guitar that accompanied, my first sort of songwriter album was done on 6-string bass. And the way that I approached the chordal foundations on a 6-string bass, I tried to transfer that over to guitar, and it made for something interesting and unique, but not particularly, not totally engaging enough for me. So after doing that for a while, I guess about 10 years or so ago, I bought myself a nice guitar, and I said, I'm going to learn how to play it. And I started, just sitting down and that was sort of about the time, well, it was a little longer than that, actually, because it was about the time of the pub. Would have been 15 years ago, I guess. And because I wanted to have another voice for writing, and it quickly took over. I don't play bass for writing anymore. I still hear the bass line in my head. Even if I'm writing something and I'm just playing one chord, I'll hear an actual melodic bass line behind it. So it's still there. I just feel like I've added something to my own set of tools. And I've learned to love the guitar. I have 3 instruments that I love right now. I have a really nice acoustic guitar, Martin, and I have a nice Gretsch and a Telly, and they cover all the sounds that I want. And I'm very comfortable playing each of them, and I enjoy playing them a lot.
So back when you started playing bass, who were your biggest bass influences? Were there bands out there that you were listening to that, everyone kind of has their idols on the instruments that they start playing?
Absolutely. And I'll have to give a shout out to Chris Broadbeck from C-Spot Run, because he was the one who C-Spot Run were in town, and Chris was hanging out with my older sister Paula, and was at the house one afternoon. And I think it was in Judas Priest or Iron Maiden solo. I was trying to learn on my guitar that I thought, and it was, so I kept lifting the needle of the record back and lifting it back, and you hear the scratching and all the crap. And Chris kind of poked his head in and said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm trying to learn this solo." He said, "Yeah, but," he said, "you're playing a bass." I said, "Nah, what do you mean?" So Chris was the first person to tell me the distinction in bass and guitar. So I have to give him the biggest shout out of all the bass players. And he recommended to me, if I was very interested in sort of something interesting bass wise, to check out like Stanley Clarke and Jaco Pastorius. And I found Stanley Clarke first. I had a few Stanley records, and I could not believe what I was hearing and what he was doing with that little piccolo alembic bass that he had. It was just beautiful. And that sort of really got me going on, I wanted to go down to California and study at the Grove School of Music to study jazz, but I couldn't afford it. So my first year that I was in university in Newfoundland, I actually ordered some of the Grove School of Music, sort of year one books for bass, and worked my way through them. Then I ended up coming to Toronto. So I came to Toronto with a fairly comprehensive knowledge of bass and styles, and a passion for the instrument at that point, that once I landed in Toronto, I had a ton of bands to play with. So I was playing with reggae bands and country bands and funk bands and rock bands. And it was a great place for me to sort of get my chops up with playing with other people. And then that just sort of kept growing.
As musicians start to get serious about their craft, usually they start to deal with resistance from family and friends. We fear what we don't understand, and parents want what's best for you, which is getting the education, getting the good job, having a career in music. That's a pipe dream, one in a million. Nobody makes it. Did you deal with that resistance at all? And if so, how did you work through that to continue on to the success you had?
The first thing that comes to mind, I guess, and I'm hoping this is the truth of it all, is that I never did work through it. I still suffer it. I have a horrible relationship with money. I have a disregard and a sort of just a yucky feeling about money, that I think comes from, being told, you can't do this. You're not going to be anything. You're going to be a bum your whole life. You're never going to own anything. You'll be asking for handouts till the time you're 70. And now, like, at 54, when we do the Whiskey Wednesday show, the hardest thing for me to do every week is to say, "Okay, Barry, play that ad," which is when Barry cues to play our donate ad. It's just like, as soon as I hit that, I just hear my mom and my dad go, "You're going to be a fucking loser for your life. You can't do this." Now, that's being also tempered with the fact that, I left Newfoundland, didn't speak to my parents for a long time. A lot of my early relationships with people ended because I wasn't spending enough time with them, and I was too interested in my music. And it just became one of those things where I realized that music is all that I can count on. And it stayed that way until I was 30. And my mom, she died when I was 30. And I remember on sort of her deathbed, sort of to be dramatic, she said, Ken, she said, it's great that you're so passionate about your music. She said, but your heart and your world is big enough to have music and people in it. She said, just find a way to balance it. And that actually really stuck with me. And that was when I kind of really settled into, having a family, and saying, for the first time in my life, saying, okay, no, music doesn't come first. My wife comes first, my child comes first, my other child comes first. And then eventually, after going through a really weird period of that sort of who's in first place, there was a couple of years of sort of adjustment for me. And then all of a sudden there was nobody in any place anymore. And that's been the last 10 years or so. I've just been learning how to, live a life with people around me, and let music be a part of it, but not let music be as dominating as it was.
Have you found
It's
that
dangerous when something is that dominating.
yeah, have you found that taking your mom's advice has raised your quality of life following it?
Yes, it took me a long time to, and it took me a lot of heartbreak and a lot of the stuff that we hear about in the business. You hear these horrible stories about the way that people are treated and the way that, things go down and the way that the business works. The reality is that there's massive emotional impact on all of those things. You hear about somebody getting screwed around by their band after all these years, and um, you hear about record company deals breaking down and all this stuff, relationships that bands have with their A&R people. Even though we read it as business in the Billboard magazines, the reality is somebody's heart's breaking all the time. Every time you hear about this, every time you hear about something like that happening, somebody's heart's breaking. And those emotional hits and scars, they change who you are as you grow. And my mom's advice, yeah, it was timely, and I sort of understood it at the time, and it did kind of change direction, but it was a massive slow change in direction too.
So you start to get serious about the bass. You start to really study your craft. You become proficient at what you do. You move to Toronto. You're playing in bands. At what point do the Watchmen come to play? So they had already, they formed in 1988. They had released an album in 1992. They were creating a buzz, and
Yep.
then there was an opening for a bass player. Can you kind of walk us through how you first became aware of the Watchmen and how the opportunity presented itself for you to join the band, or at least audition for the band?
So when I moved to Toronto, a few things happened pretty quickly. One of the biggest being that I got a job as the receptionist for a music magazine. Magazine at the time was called Music Express. And it also became a bunch of other magazines after, but Music Express was a massive worldwide distributed magazine for years. And I got a job there as the receptionist. And after a little while, the photo editor, Rayanne Hollaboff, moved to go work with Jen Arden's management team. So I filled in for a couple of weeks while we were looking for a photo editor. And after a couple of weeks, the publisher came to me and said, "Seems like you're doing the job all right. Do you want to be the photo editor?" And I'd loved photography. I'd done a little bit of it in high school, and I was still fresh out of high school. Well, within a couple of years anyway. So I was excited as hell to be working at a magazine. Now I was a photo editor. So all of a sudden I had my own office and a Rolodex with, people like Andy Leibovitz in it, world-class photographers, Anton Corbin, Herb Ritz. And I was hiring these people to shoot bands like REM, U2, Ozzy Osbourne, so I had this crazy job immersed in massive worldwide artists. I was dealing with the top of the top. I was dealing with great publicists. I was dealing with, all these fantastic people, going to all the shows in Toronto, going backstage, meeting the artists. And I did this for a couple of years. And one of the partners in the magazine was a guy named Alan Gregg. And Alan Gregg was also partners with a guy named Jake Gold, and Jake Gold managed the Tragically Hip and the Watchmen. And we were combining office spaces. So Jake's office and the magazine's offices moved over onto King and Dufferin Street, on Dufferin Street. And I got to know Jake a little bit just from meeting in the coffee room. We never had offices right next to each other, but I'd see him in the coffee room every day. And my band at the time was a band called Growl. And Growl were going to Russia. We had a Russian tour, and we went for 5 weeks, and it was fantastic. They gave me the time off work. Everything was cool. And when I came back, it was, so the year before, but when I first met the Watchmen, actually, the year before, at our Christmas party for Music Express. We had it at the Horseshoe, and we had a bunch of bands playing. One of them was this new band from Winnipeg called the Watchmen. And I remember being there setting up, and I was getting all the food and stuff set up, and the Watchmen rolled in, and they were in their white GMC van that they still have, still sitting in a field somewhere out in Neil Cameron's land in Winnipeg. But they rolled in and they hit that food table like they hadn't seen food in years. And I remember stepping back and going, who the fuck are these guys? And they played, an hour later. I was busy, sort of, there was a lot going on. I remember kind of hearing them in the background and thinking, this is interesting. So now we're back to where we were. I go on this tour to Russia, and I get back and I'm playing breakfast television with Growl, because we had just toured Russia and that was newsworthy. So we, that morning I get into work and I'm making myself a coffee after playing on breakfast TV and being up since 2 a.m. And Jake is there, and Jake says, I thought you were a photographer. And I said, no. I said, actually, I don't really take photos. I said, but I work with photographers all the time. I said, I'm a bass player. And he said, do you know the Watchmen? And I said, yeah. I said, I saw him last year at the Christmas party. And he said, well, they're looking for a bass player and they've been looking for a long time. And he said, I think you'd be perfect. I saw you today with your band. And I said, I'm not moving to Winnipeg. And he said, okay. He said, well, think about it. And at lunchtime, he called me into his office and said, listen, we're going to buy you a plane ticket, fly out to Winnipeg, all expenses covered. I want you to go out and meet the guys. And I said, sure. And, I think that weekend I flew to Winnipeg, met the guys. Our first night together, like that's the song The South, which is on In the Trees. That was a song that I was kind of working on my own, that I was going to bring into Growl. And we started playing through some of the riffs that night. And by the first night that I met him, we wrote that song, and I realized this is something cool. What a great bunch of musicians. And by the time I left at the end of the weekend, they had offered me the gig, and I came home and spoke to my people at the magazine and said, this has been fantastic and thank you so much. But I've got a connection here and there's a chance and I've got to take it. It's what I've been working for. So I joined the Watchmen and proceeded to go out to Winnipeg and be broke for a long time until we got In the Trees written and recorded, and then that came out, and then the roller coaster began.
So my understanding is you joining the band completely changed the kind of the vibe of the songwriting in the band. That before you was mostly one of the band members that was writing, and once you came in with ideas, it gave permission to everybody to be able to write and became more of a collaborative thing. Is that true, or is that fake news that I'm hearing?
It's not fake news. That was one of the things that I said to the guys, like that weekend when we met. I think I probably said it, before we even started playing, was that I wasn't interested in being in a band where I wasn't a songwriter or a part of the songwriting process. With McLaren Furnace Room, yeah, that entire record had been written primarily by Joey, all lyrics and music. Danny wrote lyrics for, I believe, 1 or 2 songs on that record, but the rest of it is all Joey's vision. Joey's sound, Joey's mind, Joey's lyrics, Joey's melodies. And Joey is an incredibly strong songwriter. He's always come into the band with, hey guys, I've got a full song. And, the full song is there. What we decided, it was a conversation that we had, and it was talked about at great length. And we decided that for the vision of the band, the lyric writing, because it had started with Joey and Danny had a contribution, and Danny being the lead singer and growing as an artist himself, it was kind of decided that, Joey and Danny would continue to do lyric writing, but the rest of us would write as a band and would contribute to those aspects of it. So I would bring in songs and I would bring in bits of songs and melodies, but I wouldn't bring in full songs with lyrics, because suddenly the lyrical vision sort of gets diluted a little bit too much. And my songwriting is considerably different than Joey's. Now, in the last, since we've started getting back together as a band, we have been, I think we've recorded 2 songs and released them. And one was Miss Monday Morning, which I had written, and the other one was Trampoline, written by Joey. And those were both sort of, that was a song that I had written and completely done. But we didn't do that in the early days. But we did the main part of our writing. What became of it then, and it became our method, was what we called the Blood from a Stone. And that was where we would get together every day at 10 o'clock, have our coffee. 11 o'clock, we'd just start banging around, making some noise, take a break for lunch, come back after lunch, sort of re-talk about what we did before lunch, then play that stuff again, till 4 or 5 o'clock, sort of maybe add something else to it. And this was Blood from a Stone. And we wrote the majority of our catalog that way. And even when Joey would bring something in completed or partially, or Danny would bring in a piano piece, or I would bring in, something that was a composition that I had made with melody and chords, we would then put it all through the same process. So I don't know much about the way the Watchmen wrote before I got there, but from what I understand, Joey brought songs in and the band kind of learned them. And I guess the big change that happened was, it opened up for everybody to be a part of the process as long as you were in the room. Sammy is a great songwriter in the fact that he has a huge musical wealth. Like his listening knowledge and his historical knowledge of albums and songwriting and the craft of songwriting is much stronger than him saying, "Oh, can you go to a minor there?" Like he doesn't know that shit. He doesn't know chords. He doesn't know that stuff, but he knows fucking music. And to have that person in a room when you're writing and to have that perspective and how they bring it to the table, that's incredible. And when I joined the Watchmen, that became the norm. All of us had a seat at the writing table, and we could all bring whatever we wanted to. It would all get treated equally. But then it went through this Watchmen machine, which then glued it together.
So your first album with the band comes out in 1994 called In the Trees. There's 3 singles, 2 of them Boneyard Tree and All Uncovered, become kind of signature songs for the band. All Uncovered is a top 5 hit. The album goes platinum. This is a big deal, man, right out of the gate after joining the band. What thoughts, memories, emotions come to you now when you think back to that album that really kickstarted this entire journey you've been on since then?
It was a very different time then. It was a time of much music and advertising, videos, billboards, all that stuff. I remember about a year into that, I'd turn on Much Music and I'd see the Watchmen video, or to be a Sam the Record Man ad featuring the Watchmen. I'd turn on the radio and CFNY and Q107 were both playing the hell out of the Watchmen. I played concerts all the time with the Watchmen. I drive down the QEW and there was like the big billboards on the side of the route with the Watchmen. I remember at one point thinking, Jesus, this is crazy. Like, how did this happen that it's just everywhere? Now, that was also completely unbalanced with the heavy weight of touring that we went into. That album came out and it went sort of immediately into charting. And I think it was the better part of 22 months that we toured before we had a real break. But then when the real break came, it was also like, okay, guys, the cycle is done. What a great run. Where's the next record? And we're all like, can we take a breather? So, and that's just kind of the story of how that thing takes off and how it, I don't know. It's really hard to explain that period of time. There's a part of me that was so happy that I was with a successful Canadian band. There was a part of me that was indulging my, fuck all yous to everybody who told me that I couldn't do this. There was a part of me that was trying not to believe in the sensationalism of it all, but there was another part of me that wanted to embrace it because it's what I'd always dreamed of. And there was a part of me that was realizing what a Canadian musician meant to be. And it wasn't what I had thought, the glamour and the ritz of it all wasn't there. So there was also the adjustment to the fact that, yes, there's a lot of money circulating around. You hear of bands signing multi-million-dollar record deals, but like the band doesn't get that money. Like that multi-million dollars goes to paying for the record and the advertising and the billboards and the radio ads and this and the other thing. And then the band has to pay it back. And usually the band doesn't pay it back. So they end off in a, unrecouped situation, which is a whole other side of the business. But I was just learning all this, and this was my first time coming to terms with, sitting at a table renegotiating management and record deals with tons of lawyers and stacks of paper and with a band. And I'm like, oh my God, what is this? Meanwhile, I'm getting used to touring. I'm getting used to being away from home. I'm getting used to navigating a relationship with Allison, who's still my wife to today. Navigating the waters of all that. It was an unbelievable time. Plus being around my heroes, being sharing stages with people that I'd had on hero worship mode for most of my life. Suddenly I was doing shows with them. It was just, and learning how to be cool through all that.
Did you ever figure out how to be cool? Any tips for the rest of us peasants?
I think I don't think I ever figured it out. I think I just stopped trying really early on.
I think it's when you stop trying, that's when you become cool, right? You just become
it could
authentic.
Very well
finally.
be. It could very well be. You being in the music business and touring and seeing it all. It's amazing the different characters and the depth of characters that you see coming out of the woodwork. You can always tell the people that have just gotten dressed up for something, and then you can also tell the people that just kind of grabbed whatever was on the floor and put it on.
With all the touring that you've done over the years, who would you say were your favorite artists that you ended up sharing a bill with?
Well, I have an affinity for Weeping Tile. Weeping Tile toured with us for a long time before Sarah Harmer went out on her own. Back throughout the 90s, Weeping Tile was a regular on the Watchmen circuit, and that was great. Early Big Wreck, we did a lot of stuff together before their album came out. We toured Canada for the better part of a couple of years before we finally did an arena tour together, and they went on their own way and we went on our own way. I don't know. This is going to sound weird, perhaps, but I mean, I think the band that I have such great memories of, from a human perspective and from a kind of music perspective, is Nickelback. Nickelback, I worked with them when I was with Thornley, and I think Big Wreck might have done some date with them too. No, it was probably all Thornley stuff with Nickelback. Anyways,
because Thornley's on 604 Records, right? Chad Kroger's label.
Yes, and Big Wreck, Ian had a history with Chad, that made them friends, and Chad and the guys were friendly to all of us. And then when they took us on tour, and it was just, for a band that as big as they are, and for a band that you hear so much hate about, they're some of the nicest guys I've ever worked with. They're incredibly down to earth, and their show, people ask me if I'm a Nickelback fan, and I have to say, like, I am. I don't have any of the records, and I don't have any of their CDs. It's not the type of thing I'd put on a Nickelback album for. But every time I've been to their concerts, and like we opened up for them a lot, so I've seen them a lot, the show is friggin' amazing. I mean, it's an incredible show. They do what they do incredibly. And that show and that level of professionalism that you see with them, that translates into the backstage with all of the crew, everybody who's working with them. I don't know how many nights I came out for a smoke at 5 a.m. before the buses were leaving, and I'd see Chad over at the fence still signing autographs. And like we did a tour. We did a bunch of tours with them, but there was one tour I was looking for. I had a couple bass endorsements that I was entertaining, and Mike said to me, why don't you try one of these Spectres out? I just had a bunch of them arrive. And I said, sure. And I tried this nice Spectre, and I loved it. It was beautiful. And he said, well, why don't you use it? I think we had 17 shows on that run. He said, use it for these shows and, see what you think. So I brought it into the set, and I used it for a couple songs every night, and thought it could be quite nice. And at the end of the tour, I gave it back to Shu, the bass tech, and, thanked him and all that. And anyways, we headed out and I went to bed, sort of 5 o'clock in the morning. I opened my bunk and the bass was in my bunk, with a note, and just keep this one. Like, it was just like, they were the sweetest, most generous people and so supportive. Like they were honestly great folks to be around. I really enjoyed their company, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think Nickelback, I think everyone actually loves Nickelback, but they're so popular that it's not cool to like them because just they're so popular. And man,
Yeah.
I have so many good Nickelback stories. So I saw Nickelback so long ago that they were opening for Everclear in Ottawa.
Mm.
So this was in about 2000. So they hadn't released How You Remind Me or
Right.
that album Silver Side Up. I saw them in an amazing quadruple bill. So there was Seether, Bush, 3 Days Grace, and Nickelback. This was in Toronto a few years ago.
Wow.
And one good story that came from an interview I did with some of the Finger 11 members, they said when their single Paralyzer came out and, goes 5 times platinum, one of the biggest hits in the world, they said that Chad Kroeger called them and said, you're about to get a ton of haters. Like, you've made it so big now with that single, you're about to get a ton of haters. Yeah. And that's how you know you've made it. And it's like Chad Kroeger and Nickelback, of all people, know what it's like to have made it and to start getting haters because you're just that big and that consistent on the radio.
It's an amazing thing. Finger 11 are another band that I've got to look back, and 3 Days Grace I look back on with great memories of. And we had we did a lot of touring with both those bands too, and they were a hell of a lot of fun. But the popularity hating thing, it has nothing to do with the artist. It's not if it's Justin Bieber or Nickelback or any of the other people that get hated on a lot. If you took the color blue and if everybody just started putting the color blue, like blocks of blue, up for pictures on Facebook and made the profile pictures blue, and blue became the most popular color in the world, it'd be amazing how many people you'd know about that hate blue. Everybody just start talking about it because it's there all of a sudden. And that's, when these bands get to that point, yeah, of course that's going to happen. But I think any band that gets to that point, haters be damned. They're doing something right to get what they've got going on happening,
Yeah, I love that Nickelback's really embraced their sense of humor and embraced the haters and the memes, and they use that now as a big part of their promotion. Like, they're actually very, very funny. And they were saying that their longevity has a lot to do with the haters, because there's so many memes that go viral and it's pushing the music. And they said without all the haters and all the jokes and the memes, they wouldn't still be around today. So
I'm sure it's true. But great guys.
So still talking about the album In the Trees, this was recorded at Metalworks, I believe. Yeah. So I'm from Ottawa. I moved to the GTA for 11 years. And for 7 of those years, I was at Metalworks. So this is way past when you guys had recorded there. Any memories from recording at Metalworks?
There was no restaurants around there.
Not yet, I guess. Now there are.
No, it was hard to find food. I remember that. No, I mean, memories. I remember making the record and being amazed at the process. That huge room in the back with all the Triumph stage gear in it. I remember setting up the drum kits back there and doing all kinds of weird things to get them to sound certain ways. Working with Doug Olson was a massive treat. Incredible guy to work with. Yeah, it was an exciting time. It was making a record in a professional studio with a big budget and microphones that I'd only dreamed of seeing. And, for the first time being in a room with all of these compressors and EQs and preamps and all this stuff that I didn't even know about, was fascinating. It was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, when you realize there are mics that are like $30,000, it kind of shifts your perspective on everything. So
absolutely.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, I don't know if before the Watchmen, your bands had received any radio play, but for sure with the Watchmen being a staple on radio, do you remember the first time hearing your music with the Watchmen on the radio, and what was that experience like?
I seem to think everything was shot in advance and everything was done in advance. I seem to remember shooting the Boneyard Tree video in Orangeville, Ontario. And I remember being up there, and I seem to remember everybody getting called over to the van because they were playing a track from the album and they were talking about it. And I think that was the first time that we'd heard anything from that album. I seem to remember that. I have a weird memory of it now. Whether it's sort of something I dreamt or if it's real, I don't know. Prior to that had been a little bit of CIUT in Toronto had played a little bit of Growl and Bone Decent and some of the other bands that I've been with. But yeah, that was my first time. But of course, it was also like CFNY. They really championed the Watchmen, it was not much, from that first time out in the field that I heard it to the 100th time I heard it was a pretty short gap of time. It seemed like it started and there was no pickup. It just started and went. It was very, very interesting. Very interesting.
So you have such a clean and crisp bass sound on that album. Songs like 34 Dead Street and Lusitana, is that how you pronounce that? Lusitana. Yep. There's some cool bass riffs on those songs. For our gearheads, are you able to share how you achieve that signature sound? So maybe the bass, the amp, the pedal that you're using?
Yeah, I had a 78 jazz bass at the time, which was beautiful. And it had EMG pickups in it. And I would play it everything wide open. Song like Lusitana and All Uncovered, those are chordal pick songs. So the trick to those songs is really to get a jazz bass, find the right pick position where you get that really bright sound. It needs to be brand new strings. With the Watchmen, even now, I change my strings every show just because there's a couple songs where I need that sound from it. And if you don't have brand new strings, you won't get that sound. It's that really clear piano ringing type sound. Lusitana was actually played on a Laravea that I had with a mahogany fretboard, I believe. Again, EMG pickups. The EMG pickups are a big part of the sound. So everything wide open. Don't fuck with the EQ or the tone on the bass at all. Wide open pick, brand new strings, and then plug it into an Ampeg SVT. The SVT Pro series are all right. The Pro 2 is my favorite out of them. But the SVT Classic, if you can get one of the classic heads with the silver front, again, the trick to those those were brand new tubes. The amp was retubed and rebiased before we started recording. You're looking at $500 worth of tubes and rebiasing, just to get that amp to really, really cook the way you want it to. And that's the essence of the bass sound. And what I learned from working with Doug Olson, he taught me, he referred to it as hair. He'd say, you want that hair on the bass, because he'd record sort of a couple different channels of bass, direct and mic, and different mics, and then he'd play them back for him. And I'd say, it doesn't sound right. It sounds like sort of, some of it sounds clear and low, and other stuff sounds like distorted and weird. And he'd say, yeah, but watch now. And he'd put in the guitars, and all of a sudden, all that grossness would disappear, and this bass tone would cut through like this. And then the rest of it would just sort of become part of the guitar. And I was just like, what'd you just do? He's like, and that was when I started to learn about sort of overlapping sounds and frequencies in the spectrum and masking and stuff like that.
He was a sonic scientist, that guy.
He really is, yeah. And a fucking genius of a guy. He used to sit for a hobby. He'd do like linear math, linear algebra and shit. But yeah, no, he taught me about the tone and how to make it sit. And that, the SVT, a P bass into an SVT or a jazz. I've been since using a PJ combo. And that's what I've been using now for the better part of 25 years, I guess, as one of my main basses.
So in 1996, you guys released a new album, Brand New Day. There's 3 singles. So there's Incarnate, Shut Up, and Zoom. Were you guys feeling massive pressure having to follow up that platinum album?
I think we were, I think we were a little disillusioned. I think, we'd seen such a blow up. We toured around the world in the 22 months prior. We'd done a bunch of stuff. The one thing that we didn't do a lot was write. And all of a sudden they wanted the record, and we had a bunch of pieces. And we decided that we would go into the studio and write the record. And there was a part of us felt like, we brought everything to that record except for the songs. And you should always have the songs first. That being said, I think we came up with a really interesting album that I like. I like it a lot. It's a little clever at times, and it's a little musicy at times. It was far less rock and roll on the whole than In the Trees was. More piano, more strings, more sort of, we explored some things. I remember being in the bass, from the bass world. I had all my basses. I borrowed a bunch of basses from a friend of mine, Andrew McNaughton, who was really good friends with Geddy Lee. So I had some of Geddy Lee's basses in the studio. I had a stand-up bass, I had all this stuff. So like every song, we'd approach it from all these different directions, but we didn't really know what we were doing. And I think that kind of, the audience was a little confused. We did have Incarnate and Zoom. What was the other single off that one?
Shut Up, I think.
Shut Up, yeah. So Shut Up was, kind of like a Lusitana type thing with a very busy, interesting bass line. But I don't think it translated the same way Lusitana did. Incarnate was still a big rock tune, and that did really well, and that had a nice video on Much Music as well for it. So, and Zoom was a little weird. Zoom was a song that, we still kind of have an unsung chorus that we always, when we're rehearsing, we always sing this weird chorus that never got recorded. It was an interesting time. Again, an interesting time, for a band to be able to go in and explore and make a record like that and still come out and have success. Our fan base was strong enough, and the album was musically interesting enough that, people still kind of went, oh yeah, I'm going to have this in the collection, and they still bought it. So, we took a chance on that record, I think everybody took a chance with us, which was nice.
Yeah. Incarnate was still a top 10 hit, and the album got nominated for Rock Album of the Year at the Junos. That was the band's second Juno nomination. What do the Juno nominations mean to you? I mean, this is Canada's Grammys. This is the country in which you live in that is honoring you for your hard work and your creativity and your craft.
It's funny because, we're Canadian, and everybody, like Canadians. And all my experiences with the Junos have ended with, well, it's always nice to be nominated. The truth is, it sucks to lose. And I've had this conversation with all these Juno nominees. It does suck to be nominated again and again and not win. But being nominated is pretty damn fantastic. And when you're in it, and that's where it comes the sort of competitive thing. When you're in it, it's like, and like I say, I've sat in that position with different musicians over the years. And there's always that excitement. There's always that, I don't even want to be here because I don't want to be here, but I need to be here. No, I want to be here. And it's this conflict of being so honored to be included with, your peers, being so afraid to be, to not win, but wanting to be so happy because one of your best friends in the other band just won, to just celebrating the experience. And the Juno, the Junos are fun. It's a great Canadian thing. Parties after are fantastic. It's expensive, but it's cool. And it is great to be nominated. It's been a part of my bio now for I don't know how many years. Ken Tizzard, Juno nominated with band this and band that, and I think it's great. I'd love to have an actual Juno, but where would I put it? My shelves are full already, and
yeah, there's just no room. I mean,
there's no room for it.
That's all good. I have some kind words sent in here from somebody that toured with the Watchmen back in the late 90s. So this is from Tony Rabalau, who was in Joy Drop at the time. went on to play with Big Sugar, and now he's having a
Mhm.
lot of success with Bedouin Sound Clash. So I just went out to
Right.
see him in Ottawa. They were headlining the Ottawa Dragon Boat Festival a few weeks ago. So this is what Tony has to say. In the late 90s, Joy Drop and the Watchmen were both very active, and both bands were friends of Big Wreck. This is when I first met Ken. We got to know each other better a little later when he joined Thornley, and Tara Sloan was doing her solo project, of which I was a part of, and we did some shows together. We would also share stories and pints at our favorite bar, the Orbit Room. This came up in the Chris Cadell interview as well. So the Orbit Room is the place to be, I hear. Ken sported a mohawk at the time and had a very large, imposing presence on stage. And of course, he's a monster of a bass player. But to talk to him in person revealed a cool, kind-hearted, and very creative soul. Haven't seen him for a while, but have followed his path as a solo artist. Mad respect. Tell him I say hello. So that's from Tony.
Wow. It's interesting that you get these little clips from people. Yeah, there was, the transition from Watchmen to Thornley was an interesting time, and there was I remember the Joy Drop days and being around a lot with Tony when Tara was doing her thing. The Toronto scene for me was always so weird. Like you said earlier, like, how do you become cool? That was the thing I had biggest problem with in Toronto. It was just like there was just so many cool people. It's just, how do you compete? And I don't know. I was always weird in those social scenes, and I always think that I'm being off-putting. It's nice to hear that people think that I'm actually a nice guy to talk to. I just always get paranoid and weird in these social situations when there's people around. It's interesting to hear their responses to it all.
So in 1998, you guys released Silent Radar. There's 4 singles: Stereo, Any Day Now, Say Something, and Brighter Hell. The first 2 singles are top 5 hits. The album goes gold. The band gets their 3rd Juno nomination. This is for Best Rock Album. Man, those first 2 singles are undeniable, like undeniable hits. I was 13 when this album came out, and I remember when Stereo would come on the radio, I had never heard anything like it before. It was so cool. It was so different. It's one of my earliest musical memories of actually really enjoying something coming on the radio. So I was a fan back then because of that song. That's the start of the Watchmen for me, was Stereo and the album Silent Radar. When you guys had those 2 songs recorded, the first 2 singles, did you know at that point that you had something special there, like a 1-2 punch out of the gate?
Well, the ordering of the songs was always left to the record company and management, I think, for the most part. I mean, they always sent us, lists, and we'd go, okay. So we didn't necessarily have the sort of 1-2 punch in mind, but we knew that the combination of Any Day Now and Stereo was huge. And then the emotional drain of Say Something and Brighter Hell were just immense. We recorded that album. That was a really special time for us. We had American sort of interest on board with what we were doing through EMI in the States, which was really nice. It allowed us to go to Seattle and record in Pearl Jam's studio with Adam Kesper, who had just finished REM, Soundgarden, all these bands. We're at the studio in Seattle. We've got people dropping by from the Seattle scene bands, and Greg Keplinger tuning drums for Sammy, and it was an amazing. It was like Metalworks and the other studios we'd been in were amazing, but this was our first time in America doing it. With these sort of big name people, and there's a little basketball court out back, and we played ping pong downstairs, and we were all in a really good place. We were excited for the record. We really felt like we had a strong record all together. It was all those things together that, by the time we got back, when that record was done and delivered to us, it just couldn't have been any better. There wasn't anything that we went, oh, fuck, I wish we could have changed this, or I wish we had done that. It was like, this is the way we want it. This is perfect. This is exactly what we're looking for. And I think it came through, and I think people responded to that accordingly.
So over the last week where I've gone back, I've listened to the entire discography of the Watchmen, of Thornley, your solo stuff. So a lot of music to sink my teeth into. And one thing that was very apparent, uh, listening to Brand New Day and then listening to Silent Radar, that there was, to me, there was like a tremendous amount of growth between both albums, where Silent Radar, the songs were undeniable. Like the songwriting itself had leveled up tremendously. The sound quality of the recording, like it sounded like a next level polished recording. The hooks were there, the harmonies. And Daniel's an incredible vocalist, and I feel like his vocals have never sounded better than starting with that album. Like whether it was the actual vocal performance or the mic choice or the mixing, I remember even back then, his vocals stood out on radio that, wow, this guy is a great singer with like a lot of character to his voice and a lot of melody in there.
I mentioned that we had a lot at our disposal there. You talk about the not slickness, but the production upness of the album. I mean, I can sum it up with a little story. We're sitting in the studio one night, we're listening back to, I think it was Any Day Now. And Danny had laid some roads down, as always does. Sort of Danny had always played all the roads on the records before. And we had some whirly on there. And somebody said, oh, man, wouldn't it be great to if we could put some really nice Wurlitzer on, some organ on this, some Hammond and blah, blah, blah. And Adam just sort of disappeared out of the room. And he came back a few minutes later. He said, I just got off the phone. Tom Petty's recording in Los Angeles. So tomorrow, me and Danny are going to fly out to LA with the tapes, with the 2-inch tapes, and we're going to get Ben Montench to add keyboards to a bunch of the tunes, and we'll be back tomorrow night. And we were like, okay, cool. And it was just like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. It wasn't like, oh my God, we're invading Tom Petty's recording session to get some keys laid down. It was like, yeah, okay, cool. It was just that it was such a weird time. The things that you learn to accept as normal that were just so absolutely fantastic. So yeah, I mean, every bit of polish that could have been used was put into an album like that.
So I have a few questions about Stereo, because this is such a great song. It's become, the signature song for the band, I believe. So a few points, and then I have a few questions. So for the decade between 1995 and actually for the 20-year period between 1995 and 2016, Stereo was in the 25 most played songs by a Canadian artist on rock radio in Canada. So that's huge. Wow. And then when I check on Spotify, Stereo is still the band's most played song with 4.5 million plays. Why do you think that people love that song so much? I know why I love it. Why do you think people love it so much?
I think it's interesting, like when that song, like at radio, it had that little organ intro. It's those little details that sort of, that we laid a hook out before the song had even started. And that song, I mean, I remember when we wrote that song, it kind of came out of nowhere when we were rehearsing on like Young and Wellesley in a little, I think we were sharing a spot with, might have been I Mother Earth or the Headstones. And it was sort of pre-dinner time, and we started knocking this idea around, and we came back sort of after getting something to eat, and Danny had the whole sort of, my life is a stereo, turn me on and let's go, and all the lyrics just kind of flew out, and it was one of those songs that we wrote really quickly as a band. And I remember going home that night. I remember like going home after that rehearsal and just singing, that's something special. Why? I don't know why. It's catchy. It's got interesting lyrics that kind of lend itself to, that sort of horoscope type of lyric. No matter who reads it, it's gonna read right.
Yeah, I remember always thinking it was so unique because the music kind of stops and starts at points. There's fading in and fading out. Do you remember where the idea for the production came in to have, you can hear things fading up and fading down. And I had to watch, like preparing for this, I watched the video of the band playing the song live to see how they would pull it off. Cause there's, to me, it sounds like there's this studio wizardry going on. I didn't know how the band would pull it off live. And then I see that it's four guys just playing the song, which makes sense.
It is. I mean, from my point of view, I go from the lightest of attacks with my right hand, barely touching the string, to I actually use two fingers and sort of play like that when I'm playing stereo. It's like that's the hardest I can possibly dig in, and that happens in split seconds within that song. And then you have breakdowns where the guitar cuts out and the bass does a slide, or the guitar will Joey will do a fade in with the guitar. There is a lot of dynamic structure to that song. We had a lot of that before we went into the studio. It was sort of ingrained in the way the songs were arranged. But being in a studio down there with Adam and having all these guitar choices for Joey allowed him to really kind of play with volume and feedback. I remember being in the control room while he was doing guitar overdubs, and it was just like, okay, we're going into this section now. We need some noise. So, they'd play back the song, and as we got close to a section, Joey'd sort of increase the volume and the feedback would come in, and then he'd stop it all right at the stop. And, it's just little building pieces like that. And I think we did a really good job of doing those parts in a way that could translate live as well. There's not a lot of behind the scenes wizardry there. A few little things here and there, but for the most part, we wanted to keep it such that a four-piece band could play it live.
For our listeners that are young musicians getting started, they have a dream of being in a successful band. Can you share what your life was like at the peak of this album and the peak of those singles? So to me, from the outside, I might be wrong with this, but so In the Trees was platinum and this album was gold. But to me, this album, Silent Radar, feels like the peak of the Watchmen's popularity. Is that correct? Or do you think In the Trees, the band was actually having more success?
I think during In the Trees, there was a period of time where we were involved in Columbia House. And, the Columbia House, 11 CDs for a penny or whatever it was.
I've done it a few times.
I think we were on the cover of Columbia House magazine. So anybody who subscribed that month automatically added our CD just because we were on the cover. And, I think that on In the Trees, there was a huge bump in the numbers because of, inclusion and stuff like that. And I also think that the other, the later albums were facing the intro of the digital age. So things were changed and things were starting to change. There was a stench coming in the air of something is going to go wrong really soon with the music industry. It was starting to creep in and at about this time as well, which was, again, we were all kind of aware of it, but we weren't really attuned to it because we were, like I say, we were recording an album at Pearl Jam studio in Seattle, with like a massive budget. So it's kind of stupid.
So in 2001, you guys released Slow Motion. So this is the band's last album. There's 3 singles: Absolutely Anytime, Holiday, Slow It Down, and Slow Motion. So Absolutely Anytime was a top 10 hit in Canada for several weeks. The album is the highest charting album at number 6. It goes gold. So there's 8 original songs on the album, and then there's a second disc that's a greatest hits album. My understanding is the label wanted just a greatest hits album with like 1 or 2 new songs as singles that push people to buy the greatest hits album, but you guys had all this new music you wanted to get out. Is that true that you guys had to kind of negotiate with them to put out more new music that you had available?
That was definitely the beginning of the end, in that with our relationship to the record company. We had up to that point had a relationship where they pretty much gave us, freedom to do whatever we want. Here's your budget, go make a record. Now, all of a sudden, the digital thing is changing. We've got pressure from the record company to go become spokespeople against Napster. Get on the board to get against this internet thing. I was also involved in a lot of electronic music at the time. While touring on Silent Radar, I had gone to a show in Germany. I went to see Prodigy. Nice. And it changed. The Prodigy experience for me was like the time that I saw SNFU when I was like 14. I could not believe the energy and the visceral experience that I was having listening to this music that I didn't even know. So I came back from that our European tours, and when we started writing for the next record, I would on the way to rehearsal, and I'm going to say, "Can I have a unit? Give me one of your synth units." And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "I don't know, something that makes noise." I'm like, "Do you want a keyboard or a sampler?" I'm like, "I don't know what I want. Can you like just give me some? I want to go to a practice and make noise." So I started showing up to practice with these little boxes, and I'd plug them in, and we were doing our Blood from a Stone thing, and Joey's playing a chord, and I'm trying to find a note that works with it, and fucking with the sound, and there was resistance to it at the time. There was huge resistance. The guys were like, "Just play your bass." I'm like, "I don't know, there's something here." And then during that time, we started to actually embrace it. And by the time Slow Motion came out, if not before, I mean, we were touring. Danny was actually playing bass on one song. There was a period of time where there was one song in the set where I was playing. I had vinyl involved. I had 2 turntables. I had a sampler. I had CD players. I had a couple of keyboard units, foot controller for keyboards. So I was doing all this. And it was one song I couldn't do it all. So I had to give Danny the bass. So Danny used to play bass for a song. And then this led to a side project called Audio Playground High and Wide, because I was bringing in some material that Danny was singing on, but the Watchmen didn't think it felt Watchman-y, because it was very keyboard based, very sort of, I was playing fretless bass and very sort of downbeat electronica stuff. And of course, that wasn't what the Watchmen had been doing at all. But there was some interest in what me and Danny were doing, and there was some interest in what the Watchmen were doing. But there was a big push from the record company to try and start doing more electronica stuff like Moby and all these other bands that were popular at the time. And we didn't really want to do that, but we'd already kind of started doing it. So it was already kind of there, but then we were being pushed to do it. So then, of course, me, authority, or I hate authority. I was like, "I'm here anyways, but don't tell me to do this." There was some of that, and everything was just changing. And Sammy had left the band under not great conditions. So we were working without a drummer. So the idea of working with drum machines was appealing, but at the same time, coming from a rock and roll world, we really wanted a rock and roll drum sound. So we ended up doing the record. Some of those songs, like Holiday, I think, I can't even remember what songs are on the record, but I mean, a bunch of them were sort of Audio Playgrounds things that we kind of brought over. Of course, Absolutely Anytime was one of those songs that Joey just came in with and said, "Here's a full song." And we're like, "Fuck, this sounds great. And we can treat this however we want." And we experimented, and it was a really interesting time because we made good music, but we fought for it. We fought amongst ourselves. We fought amongst the record company. I think we fought internally with how we were feeling about what was going on. It was a very, very tumultuous time. However, it did lead to a pretty interesting record, and we brought Ryan Ahoff on board, and he toured with us live for a couple of years while we did that record. And I really did enjoy that time. I mean, and that was a very different time for me too. I was changing as an artist too. I was doing the Watchmen shows. And again, I had, I had keyboard pedals for my feet. I had 2 keyboards, record players, samplers, all this stuff, plus my bass. And I'd pack up after the Watchmen shows, and I'd put all my gear on the bus, and I'd grab a crate of records, go out and start spinning. Like I was DJing from like 2 till 5 in the morning when the bus left. I'd show back up at the bus at, 4:45, and we'd drive off to the next city. I'd do it all again the next night. So that was just another time where I was so, I think I just wanted to experience everything, and I was young, and I had the energy, and I had the resources to do it. So, I mean, I did everything that came my way, and it was great. The story of how it all happened is interesting and fascinating. And the bands that took me on the trip have been great, but yeah, all in all, it's been just a quest to do as much as I can.
You were like Geddy Lee up there, where he's playing bass and singing and playing keys, and his feet are playing pedals that are keeping notes going. Like, it's how when you see Rush, there's only 3 guys, and if you close your eyes, for sure it's a 12-piece band up there. It makes no sense. Yeah. So the Watchmen have upcoming shows in Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Toronto. What can fans expect at those upcoming shows?
Something, it's fans can expect what they've always expected from us. And that's, four guys, kind of jeans and t-shirts, sweating it out, playing some rock and roll. I keep thinking, oh God, we're getting older. Can we still do this? And we get out and we do it. And I see the videos after and stuff, and I see the audience feedback, and it's like, yeah, we're still doing it. We're still kicking at it hard. We're having a great time. We enjoy being around each other now, because it's shorter periods of time. So it's good all around.
As a fan of the Watchmen, I have to ask: Are there any plans for new music? Anything in the? I have to ask. You don't have to answer, but on behalf of all the fans, I have to ask.
It's always being discussed. It's always,
lie to me, Ken. If there's no music, just lie to me, brother.
No, it's always being discussed, and I can't imagine within the next 5 years that you won't hear something new from the Watchmen. I mean, that would be my impression. There's an interest, there's a willingness, and there's also there's a good opening to sort of probably make something happen. But again, we're all really busy, and we're all artistically, pulled in different directions too. So it's a tough one. But I would be sad if it didn't happen.
So I mentioned that I started being a fan of the band at 13, and I have some kind words sent in from somebody who also started being a fan in their teenage years. This is from gold selling artist Daniel Victor of Neverending White Lights. This is what he has to say. I have followed the Watchmen since my high school days, and they've been a big influence in my life. The band was able to create memorable and lasting work that was emotional, punchy, melodic, self-assured, and thought-provoking all at the same time. Not an easy feat. The Watchmen stood out, so much so I had to ask Daniel to be a part of my first album. The nuance and flavor of Ken's musical contribution to that band cannot be understated. His bass lines have provided the core energy, groove, and backbone to what they are. In fact, I chose to cover On My Way with Neverending White Lights partly because the bass part lives rent-free in my head all the time. His talent as a multi-instrumentalist speaks for itself, and it's been exciting to hear his work with Thornley and through his amazing solo albums in the acoustic folk rock realm. His continued output in any manner is most eagerly welcome by many. So that's from Daniel Victor, Neverending White Lights. He's got a way with words, that guy.
Wow, Daniel, thank you very much, and love to you as well. Yeah, that's it's nice to hear these things. Actually, it's very strange. It's strange to admit that it's nice to hear these things. I do live in a bit of a bubble these days, and I often feel like my existence is a vacuum. It amazes me when anybody has anything to say at all about what I've been doing. Another great Canadian band, Neverending White Lights. So much good music has come. I have had the pleasure of being exposed to so much great music in my life. I can't believe the stuff that I have seen, the people that I have got to meet. Yeah, it's I'm eternally grateful for everything that music has given to me, even though it hasn't given me much money.
So following the album Slow Motion, you joined Thornley in 2002. This is like a super group. I mean, there's Ian Thornley, there's Sekou, there's Tavis, The Art of Dying, you from the Watchmen. This is like a super group that's formed. How did that opportunity present itself? You've already mentioned tours with Big Rec. I guess that would be the start of the relationships.
Well, it's interesting because the first show that we ever did, we were called Supergroup.
Oh, wow.
We opened Edgefest in whatever year. It was like a last minute thing. Ralph called and said, you guys have been working on some new material. It sounds really cool. Let's get you out to do a show. And we said, well, we're not even a band yet, And anyways, we ended up doing it, and they called us Supergroup. I was the end of the Big Rec Watchmen arena tour, the co-headlining tour. I can't remember what year that was. But that year, Ian met my sister, Christine, and they ended off becoming a couple and getting married, having a family. So a few years later, the Watchmen have finished Slow Motion. We finished the tour. Audio Playground is kind of not really happening anymore because stuff got kind of, there was sort of, it's just everything was weird there. The band was kind of feeling strange. Big Wreck were going through a very similar thing. They were kind of riding the bottom of the roller coaster, and the camp was a little worn and tired. And I was spending a lot of time with Ian. And just hanging out in Toronto because I was home and Ian was home. And of course he was with my sister and family, and you're in proximity. So for the better part of a year, me and Ian were just hanging out at his studio with me and Ian and Sekou, and writing, recording, just sitting there all day, drinking beer, smoking cigarettes, listening to stuff we recorded, changing lyrics, changing chords, re-recording it again, doing all this. And we were doing this for about a year. And that was when Ralph approached us and said, "Do you guys want to do Edgefest?" And we said, "Sure." And I guess that kind of triggered something with the Watchmen, because at that point, we were it was just me and Danny and Joey. We had Ryan as a sideman, but we didn't really have a permanent drummer. It had been really sort of hard on all of us, parting ways with Sammy, and being through what we'd been through. And then when I was doing this thing with Ian, I got a call from Danny and Joey, and they said, "Well, are you leaving the Watchmen?" I said, "No, I'm just doing what I do." And there was sort of a conversation about, maybe we shouldn't be doing projects with other people, and, keeping things focused. And I guess, I was at that point where I just kind of said, yeah, I want to work with other people. I want to do things. I want to, I want to keep with the Watchmen, but I want to be able to do things other than that. And, so the Watchmen and Big Wreck sort of both died at that point. And me and Ian had just spoken amongst ourselves and said, let's start a new band. And then we started taking the demos and started shopping them and moving them out. We didn't have a band name at the time. And, then management and record company came on board, and then there was some shift in the way of thinking there, and it became a very Thornley centric project, and name became Thornley, and then the record came out, and that was a whole other start of a whole other road. Yeah, a whole other path.
So I remember that album coming out in 2004. I went out and bought it. Man, that was a big deal. The album goes gold, 5 singles. So far, so good. Come Again, Easy Comes, Beautiful, all comes out in the wash. The first 2 singles were top 5 hits. I remember there was success in the US as well. It wasn't just in Canada. That album, spread its wings in other countries. I actually saw Thornley, and I don't know if you were in the band then. I saw Thornley with Theory of a Dead Man at the Ottawa Civic Center. And so the album comes out in 2004. I feel like this is probably 2006, maybe between 2004, 2006. Do you remember ever playing the Civic Center with Thornley?
Many times.
Theory of a Dead Man?
Yeah, I think we did a New Year's show there, and we did a couple shows there at the Civic Center. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So I'm a big fan. I remember all my best friends at the time, they were huge Thornley fans as well. So were you feeling I guess kind of fortunate that you were in this platinum selling band, and then you find yourself in another popular gold selling band, having success on radio and touring? I mean, most people will never enjoy success with one band, let alone 2 or more.
I was very, very aware of how rare and lucky fortune had shined on my way. Getting to work with the Watchmen, for my entire career, and having stuff like, Thornley, Ron Hines, these other things sort of on the side have been so amazing. The time with Ian and Sekou, and there was a series of guitarists, but for a large part of it was Tavis. Because we had worked on that record for the better part of a year and a half, almost 2 years, from kind of little sort of riffs to full songs, and then going in and recording them, with Gavin Brown, again, recorded monster sounds. Getting to experience what Ian had learned about playing guitar, and what Ian learned about guitar layering and putting guitar parts in, very different than the way that Joey worked. The entire experience was very different than the Watchmen. And then, of course, going down to the US, which we did, a lot. The Watchmen never really toured in the US. I mean, we did for brief periods of time, but not for like stretches of a couple of years like we did with Thornley. And US touring is a totally different ballgame as well. Very, very different. The shows are closer. The fans are crazier. It's a more, everything about it is just a little bit more visceral. Even sort of the fame element of it. You see a tour bus in Regina outside a club and you walk by it. Down there you see a tour bus outside some club and you line up outside it and wait to see who's on it. They've got that fan mentality, which we don't really have in Canada. So everything about it was different. And of course, playing with Sekou, totally different. Sammy is one of the most rock solid drummers that I know. And I know Sammy's playing inside out. But then all of a sudden there was this Sekou cat who, had that element, but also had this sort of crazy musical expression that went way outside of that as a drummer, and helped me to further my bass playing too. He made playing bass really easy. And of course, standing next to Ian on stage night after night and just waiting to see what's going to come out from the guitar. Fuck, man, that guy. He is a genius guitar player, and it was a privilege to stand on stage with him night after night.
So we have about 30 minutes left. I'd love to dive into your solo career.
Sure.
Man, we even in 30 minutes, we don't have enough time to dive into each of those albums. I was able to find, I believe, like 5 solo albums, but then there's your name with like bands attached, and there's another album here and another album here, another album here, and then there's an EP, and then there's singles. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to focus on the newest album altogether now, because I mean we I did there. Yeah, there's just so much. You're prolific. I mean, it's not my fault. I can't cover everything here. But so Altogether Now comes out in 2021, which means this is a pandemic album. What were the challenges in recording and releasing an album during the pandemic?
The big thing about that album for me, my wife was diagnosed with MS years back, and she's been getting progressively worse. And the year before coronavirus and the pandemic hit, we went to Ottawa to have a stem cell bone marrow transplant done for her, which was a 6 months to a year long procedure, followed up with a 2 to 5 year recovery. So at that point, the doctor said, you guys are going to be in sort of a bubble. And I'd never heard the term before. And he said, you need to get people to do your shopping for you and go outside because, Allison will have no immune system at all. So, you have sort of sterilizing station when you come into your house and all this stuff. And we said, okay, that's fine. It'll just be for the 6 months to a year of the, of what's going on. And they said, yeah, it'll be fine as long as there's not some, weird worldwide pandemic. Skip ahead a year, there's a worldwide pandemic. So me and Allison had already been in seclusion for a year. And during that time, I had started working with a few people remotely because I couldn't be out and tour as much as I wanted to and as much as I was used to. And then when I noticed everybody was being locked down, I thought, okay, well, what did I go through last year? Like, what were my challenges? And I thought one of my challenges was finding something to do with my time. So I made an open suggestion online. Anybody who wants to make a record with me right now, let's see what we can do in 30 days. And I got such a massive response that it ended off taking the better part of a year to do this record. I think we had 44 musicians on it in the end. Everybody from some of the Nickelback right down to people who've never recorded a song in their life. Some people reached out to me and said, I'd love to sing backups on a song, but I don't have any stuff. Can I just, can I listen to the song on headphones and just sing it into my voice recorder on my phone? And I'm like, sure. And then I got stuff like that. And I sent it off to Mike Turner, who was doing, all the mixing and production on it. And he made everything sound beautiful. Like I say, we've got an amazing assortment, and it's 13 cover songs, sort of some of my favorite cover songs. And it was a great chance to work with people. The question that you asked was, was it a struggle to do it during Corona or during the pandemic? And the reality is it wouldn't have happened. It's a pandemic album. the struggle came not from the pandemic, but from putting together that many people in a, so the way I did the record, just to give you some idea how it worked, I sat down and I played each song to a metronome, a little click in my head, and I just played acoustic guitar and sang into a mic for each of the songs, each of the 13 songs. And anybody who wanted to be involved, whether you were a drummer, a bass player, a fiddle player, a flute player, or whatever it was, I just sent you that track and the metronome setting. So everybody took that and put it into their computer on their DAW and set the metronome, and then they would play along and record their flute or whatever, and they just send it back to me. And I ended off with hundreds of pieces of music. And then I sorted through them. I did all the editing, did a little bit of sound sculpting, and then it all went to Mike Turner for mixing. And he did an amazing job making it sound like everybody was in the same room. And it was an incredible album to do. It was just so much fun. It was the right type of thing to tackle at that time. And I did vinyl, which took all the profitable nature away from it. But it also, it was a great thing because everybody involved got copies of the vinyl too. So it was, it was a real sort of labor of love. Mike Turner, I could not have done it without him, and Noah Mintz as well. He mastered it for free. Everybody that wanted to be a part of it, even Tim Lee, the artist who did the cover, I reached out to him and he sent me the art for the cover, and he said, I just want to be a part of this. It's all gratis, and so like everybody worked for free, and we got it done, and it was a great record. What a great time! What a great time to meet all these musicians. And some people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I'm playing on the same song as a member of the Headstones." It's just like some of their favorite bands that they ended up getting paired with, and they never even met them or anything, but they're on a record with them. So it's pretty fascinating time, and it does show the work that you can do without leaving your house.
Well, now I know why it's called All Together now, so I don't have
exactly.
don't have to ask that. So Mike Turner, you're talking about, this is the original Our Lady Peace guitarist on the first like 3 or 4 or 5 albums, yeah. Right? Okay, cool. Yeah. And Noah Mintz is the man when it comes to mastering. He's done so many albums.
Yeah, absolutely.
And how did you choose which cover songs to cover on this album?
So I actually went back to the whole Whiskey Wednesday thing. I thought back to the first batch of tunes that I learned, and there was like a George Jones tune, a Clash tune, a Cure tune, a Billy Bragg tune, a Neil Young tune,
Bob Dylan,
and that's what sort of made up the record. It was just sort of all the things that after all my years of making original music, when I finally sat down at the pub and started doing covers, what were my first choices? And even stuff like Brown Eyed Girl I put Brown Eyed Girl on because it's one of those songs that I hated getting requested for. And people asked for it so much, I finally learned it. But I learned this really slow maudlin version of it that people would request, and I'd finally play it and they'd go, "No, don't play it like that." But we did a really nice job of it on the album.
Yeah, you basically covered the greatest singer-songwriters of all time. Like when I looked at the list, there was Bob Dylan, John Lennon, Van Morrison, you mentioned, Neil Young, you mentioned. I believe there's a Tom Petty cover as well.
Tom Petty too, yeah.
Well, that's a good place to start, just starting with the greatest of all time.
Exactly.
Not bad. Now, you've released 2 new singles in 2023. So there's Drunk, Stoned, and Broke, and there's $1 a Day. So both are from an upcoming album, The Dagg Session. So what can you tell our listeners about Steve Dagg and then about the new album?
Steve Dagg was a friend of mine, and he was the drummer for Music for Goats for the last 7 years. Steve developed cancer a few years back, and last year fought really hard about it, had a bunch of surgeries. We postponed the album for a year. Then in the fall, when he got the all clear and he was feeling good, we went into the studio, recorded all of his drum parts because he was going to have some more surgery over the winter. And unfortunately, the cancer returned at Christmas time this year past, and he died in the spring. So after he died, I was thinking about, what am I going to do with the record? And it occurred to me that, I couldn't bear to sit down and sort of immerse myself in all the drums and the record so close to Steve's passing, but I could manage to do it, one song at a time. It wasn't too overwhelming. So I decided that between May, and December, I'm going to release a series of singles. And each of these singles, come wintertime, will be released on a full album called the DAG Sessions. And it's 10 songs that we recorded with Steve before he passed. So that gives me time to mix them. And I'm still processing Steve's death. We're still in a state of, I guess we're in a state of grieving. I still feel like I might be in a state of disbelief. I find it really hard to think that he's not just down the road and isn't going to show up again for rehearsal, but that's my own thing. But the DAG Sessions is, it will be the first official Music for Goats album. We have a live album out from the pub a few years back, which was great. This will be the first official album of 10 original tunes, and Steve will be playing on all of them. We have a new drummer now, a young guy named Dave. He's been hanging out and working with us. Dave Lawrence, very nice guy, lives in town. He's just down the road. He likes to fish. He's a cool guy. So we're still getting to know him. And we've done a couple shows with him this summer. So we're sort of taking it as it comes along, but we are really excited. And I've also gotten really into video making. I did the two videos for these two songs, Drunk, Stoned, and Broken, $1 a Day. Both shot in black and white, both very simple, one camera sort of shots, but they're both pretty interesting videos. So I'm happy with the way that's going out too.
I saw that there was a GoFundMe page for Steve, and it looked like there was like $60,000 raised. I don't know if is that still open that people can go, or
I don't know if it's still open. It probably is. Steve was early 40s, wife, 2 young kids. So it is a hard thing to leave behind and keep things going. So it probably is still open, but I know that they did sort of surpass what they had hoped for. The community had been really, really strong around them.
So you mentioned you've been getting into making music videos. So there's a music video for Sunny's Dream. It features your daughters, Caitlin and Cassidy, singing harmonies. Do your daughters think their dad is a rock star or just some schmuck at home?
No, I'm just some schmuck at home. But my daughters, they do... They learned when they were like 9 and 7. We were down in the States in Cleveland, and Miley Cyrus was playing at the arena, and I made some phone calls and got us tickets and backstage passes, and we got to go into the afternoon for sound check and meet Miley and stuff. So that afternoon we were going out sightseeing or going to a mall or something. The girls didn't know what was happening. And then all of a sudden we pull up at this arena and there's nobody there. There's no cars because it's the middle of the day. And we walk and we go in. They're like, where are we going? I'm like, oh, just come on with me. You'll see. And we go in and then we sit down, and then Miley Cyrus walked out on stage for her sound check, and the girls were just like, oh my God. And I think that was when they first sort of turned to me and went, how did you do this? I'm like, I just made some phone calls. They're like, you know these people? I'm like, well, I don't know Miley, but I happen to have a connection in the crew. And so we got to meet Miley and stuff. And I think that was when the girls kind of went, oh, my dad is an interesting person, or he knows interesting people. And they're big supporters of my music. They always have been. They love singing with me. They did that video with me. They don't complain when I say, hey, do you girls want to shoot a cheesy video with me? Sit in this old car and drive around and sing Sunny's Dream. They love it. And they've been on the Whiskey Wednesday show a bunch of times together singing, when they were still living at home. And it's always just a lot of fun. They're good kids, and they have a great respect and love for music.
Do they also have aspirations of doing music full time, or this is a hobby that they enjoy? They just happen to have, they've been surrounded their entire life with musical talent with you, that they absorbed it from osmosis.
Well, I don't know if that's the case. I mean, I think the fact that they could probably sing the entire first 2 Bob Dylan records verbatim, it shows that I was a good musical parent.
That's a parenting win, I think. Yeah.
Exactly. Caitlin they're both natural musicians, and they can both sing and they can both play. Cassidy has a real adept nature to be able to read music and understand theory, whereas Caitlin will sit at a piano and just play. Caitlin, she has a guitar, she has a little piano, she sits around and plays guitar on the couch, and she writes her own songs. Cassidy's very busy with school. She's finishing her engineering degree at Queen's, so that's very demanding. But at the same time, she's got a bass in her apartment. She plays bass, and she's always talking about going and playing maybe a little jazz band or something. So they both have music in their life. Whether they're going to pursue it or not, I have no idea. I don't push them either way. I'm happy that they're both out living their lives and doing what they're doing.
So I have a hypothetical question. So if we fast forward into the future, I'm talking in 100, in 500 years, if most of today's music has been wiped from human consciousness, but we were able to have one Watchmen song and one of your solo songs still be around for people to listen to at that point, which songs would you choose? It doesn't have to be the most popular songs, but maybe what you think best represents the band and yourself as a solo musician. These are some of the tough questions at the end here.
Well, it is, because with Watchmen, the obvious choice is Stereo. It was kind of the culmination of our rock and roll and songwriting skills meeting in a beautiful place. The lyrics are still poignant. It's not sort of pop drivel, but it made it to a point where, pop drivel usually lives. So I would be happy to go with Stereo on that one. From my solo stuff, it would probably be a song called Home, a song I wrote about Newfoundland when I was touring with Ron Hines, inspired by the vibe of Ron, and reflecting on, growing up in Newfoundland, what I did. Yeah, it's pretty big win for me on that one.
That's actually your most popular song on Spotify, I believe.
It's got over 30 listens.
There you go. Yeah, your fans agree with your song choice. You've had a lengthy career at this point. How do you keep this fun? It looks like you're still enjoying what you do.
I think gratefulness is the key. At this point in my life, anyways. Me and my wife are very much, after my wife is still, she's in her own hospital bed in a different room of the house, where she sleeps. So, every night when I get her all tucked in and before I go to bed, we have a moment, we talk about what we're grateful for in the day. Sometimes it can just be for the sandwich that I had at lunch. Other times it can be for a check that I wasn't expecting, or for a call from a friend. But I think tracking gratefulness is a really, really important way to measure your days. We get so caught up in the little things, and we get so caught up in the negative things. I find, at least once a day, sort of taking a moment to look around and appreciate things is really, really important. That being said, I also, I smoke a lot of weed.
That helps. Feel better.
Smoke weed, but that's always been the way. So, that's okay.
Yeah, I've studied a lot of successful people, and they all have 4 or 5 things in common. And one of them is gratitude. They practice gratitude, or they have a gratitude journal they write in every morning or every night. And it's actually one of the keys to success is if you don't appreciate what you currently have, it's like the universe or source or whatever won't provide more than what you have now. So
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So I have kind words sent in from one more person. Can you handle nice words one more time? Can you handle that? I know it's hard to accept sometimes, but this is from the platinum selling and Juno award winning singer-songwriter Holly McNarland. So Holly says, Ken is a really good man, and he would walk the world for his wife and his family. So short and sweet from Holly McNarland.
Yeah, Holly's a lovely, lovely lady. And God, what a performer. And she's right. Yeah, no, she's right. I have a really good relationship with my wife. We've been together for a long time. We've been through so much together. And I think, the last 5 years sort of being her there for her, and having her be there for herself. I think that's kind of weirdly made us even stronger. I don't know. I don't think about it too much. I just get up and do what I do. And when people ask me, I have to think about it and go, well, why am I doing this? It's just the right. It's not even the right thing to do. It's just what we do. It's just, I like being with her. She's a great human being. We get along excellently. I'm just as good to be hanging out with her all day as I am to be working somewhere. It just so happens this is what I do. it's not a bad thing. It keeps me at home. You know, I built a studio in the house. I built a broadcast studio in the house. You know, she helps produce the Whiskey Wednesday show. We're kind of constantly working together all day. And, you know, we have a great run of Netflix at night. And, you know, it's life is pretty grand, you know. And thanks to Holly for noticing. I do love Holly so much. She did a lot of touring with the Watchmen. Not a lot. She did a couple of shows, a couple of runs with the Watchmen, and they were always so much fun. We'd always just end off going out and getting into so much trouble late at night, just, you know, going and crashing frat parties and stuff. Just well, I remember wandering around the streets of Ottawa with Holly, me and Holly and Sammy, and might have been Ian, just wandering around like in the residential area, like where all the kids were living, and like going from house to house where there was parties and just walking in and crashing parties. Yeah, she was a lot of fun. She still is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have a sister that's a couple of years older than me, and I remember my sister owning the first Holly McNarland album and blasting it, and I remember being blown away. I remember the snare sound on her singles were ridiculous.
Oh, unbelievable records, unbelievable person. Yeah, extremely talented.
Yeah. I guess the last thing I would say about that is she had such, like, it was great songs, but she had such attitude, like in all the right ways. Like, it wasn't this bubblegum pop. It was like someone with something to say, and the energy behind what she was saying as well.
She had a very much a punk rock attitude, which I connected with upon meeting her the first time. Yeah.
So we have a tradition here on the podcast where we have the guest leave a question for the next guest without knowing who it is, what they do, male or female, age. So I'll start with a question that's left for you. And this is from Dan Preston, who I believe you've actually connected with a few times. So he left this question without knowing that it was for you. Dan's question is, what is the one thing you would have changed in your career that would have had the biggest positive impact on it?
Okay, there's probably a right answer there. I can think of a few specific times in my career where, had I done things differently, they would have had an impact. But when I think about those things, and when I think about what actually happened as opposed to what would have happened, I mentioned the word luck earlier. I've been lucky so much. It's not like there's something I can look back on and say, I should have done this or I should have done that. You know, the one thing that I would advise or change, if I had to go through it again, I hate to say change, because you make one change and who knows what happens to your whole world. So that's not really fair for me to say, but anybody going through what I've been through, or going through the music business, the one thing that I would have wished that I had done more is to sort of listen a little bit more confidently and contentedly to advice from others. I think I grew up with a big chip on my shoulder, always feeling that I had to prove something. So whenever somebody, as a younger musician, if somebody tried to give me some advice, I would get my back, I would get out of sorts rather than listening and going, why are they giving me this advice? Because my impression is, when somebody gives me advice, is that they're telling me that I'm wrong about something and that I'm doing something wrong. Whereas the reality is they're just sort of showing you another perspective. And I would immediately go to, them insulting me as opposed to them trying to help me. So I wish that I had been a little bit more aware of that at a younger age, because I did spend a lot of time with wonderful people that I think that I probably would have learned more from had I not been so stupid in my own head.
And can you now pay it forward and provide a question that I will ask the next guest without knowing who it is? So it could be funny, silly, memorable, quirky, whatever comes to mind.
Well, okay, I'll ask this question because I actually know the answer to how it would be for me. But what is your favorite piece of clothes that you've left behind at a gig and you've tried to recover unsuccessfully? Because everybody has that piece of clothing that got left behind on a hanger when it was drying behind a door or something.
That's awesome. Never got back. All right, I got that down. Final two questions here. When you look back on your life and career, what are you most proud of and what are you most grateful for?
Well, I think I'm grateful for the combination of family and music, which I have also learned to accept on equal, footing in my life. I think that's where the majority of my gratitude lies. What was the other part of the question?
Proud of and grateful for.
Proud of. I think I think I'm pretty proud of my. I'm not completely 100% happy, but I'm pretty proud of the way that I've raised my kids. I think I've got a good relationship with them. I'm still working on it. Coming from the relationship that I had with my parents, I wanted things to be different with my kids. And I think I'm pretty proud of that. They know the real me. They know who I am. They know that I love them. They know that I have issues, and they know that I'm not always as communicative as I should be. But unlike the relationship I have with my dad, who was like this, it was just like, who's the old guy in who, sort of never talks. And when he does, it's something angry. I have OCD and a few other things which my dad also had. But I treat mine and I try and understand them where my dad didn't. So I think that that's been a really good thing for me to have overcome in my life, and also to be able to have expressed that in my parenting to my kids.
If you could sit down next to your 10-year-old self and you could whisper words of advice, so you've had a lifetime now of ups and downs and lessons and mentorships and successes and failures. What words do you whisper to cute little Ken there to help him, to guide him through this human existence?
Yeah, I don't know. It's
just give him a hug or something.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's just kind of a just say, everything's going to be all right, don't worry about it, is sort of weird and maudlin. But at the same time, to say something like, this is just the way it is, get used to it, is equally as dismissive. I was a child who spent a lot of time alone in his head, just dreaming of getting away, dreaming of doing something. And once I discovered music, that became everything. It was just about playing music, playing in a band, playing with people, playing on stage, playing in a bar, touring, like just moving it forward, one thing after the other. And in all honesty, it's still the same today. I wake up in the morning and it's like, what am I doing today? And it's music. It's like, it's what I do, whether it's playing, or now there's a lot more business associated with it, with show and promotion and all that stuff. But it's all within the same business, and it's all the same thing. And it's just finding a way to be free to do what I really want to do, without the burdens of what the world expects, and all that stuff. So yeah, like I said, I don't really know. It's not, it's going to be okay, or this is just the way it is. It's just, I guess what I'm saying is there's nothing that I would really want to change. Life is full of crap. But if you take it out, then life gets weird. The value gets strange. So I think I'm just at a really good point in accepting everything in my life these days. Even the bad things that could be changed, like certain friends that I don't have anymore because I don't want them in my life. But I kind of think sometimes, I still do love that person, but having the freedom to be able to choose who and where and when I am is really a great thing. So I don't think I'd tell Ken at 10 years old anything. Let him figure it out himself.
You just sit there next to him and you just chill with him a bit.
Exactly.
That's awesome. Where can our listeners find you on social media? So if they want to stay in the loop with the Watchmen, with you and your solo stuff, so maybe some websites, and then for social media, if they want to see any pictures or clips, or slide into the DM saying, I love the interview, or I need a bass player for something, where do they go?
Well, everything, KenTizzard.com is the website. And from there, you will find links to everything. But I'm on Facebook, Facebook.com/Ken Tizzard takes you to my personal page where, it'll be pictures of me and the family, plus all the music stuff. Ken Tizzard Music will take you straightly to the band page. Instagram, Twitter, it's all K Tizzard or Ken Tizzard. If you type in Ken Tizzard on any of the platforms, you'll find me. The Whiskey Wednesday show, you'll find for sure. We've now got, I can't remember how many hundreds of episodes we've got recorded now, but they're all on YouTube. There's a massive library there, and they're all on the website too. They're archived by month and by artist, so it's all there. You can't really miss it if you're interested in finding it.
Is there anything you'd like to say to the fans that have supported you all the way back to the beginning, the early days?
Well, I've been a huge fan of mentioning that, without the people to listen to the music and to allow us to have these careers, we're just musicians sitting in a room or a basement or a garage. I've been thanking fans for years through signatures and time and emails and personal notes and phone calls. I like to stay in touch with the fans. The one thing that I'm very aware of is that we are all people and everybody has an interesting story. So I try and spend time to get to know people, but it's I've appreciated everything, everything that you've stayed with. From a solo perspective, it always freaks me out when people are interested because, the Watchmen and Thornley and the sort of, the millions of dollars that got spent on promotion and budgets to make those bands, as popular as they were, that doesn't exist in the world of solo singer-songwriters. So when I get somebody who's discovered me and actually is enjoying what's happening, it's amazing. I feel blessed every day, and it's all because it's because of the music in my life and because of the relationship my music has with other people. So I'm full of thank yous for everybody who's supported in any way.
So as we wrap up, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge you for your lifelong pursuit of mastery as a bass player, as a singer-songwriter. I want to acknowledge you for all the great music you've written and released with the Watchmen, with Thornley, your solo career as well. I want to thank you for supporting the podcast by providing quotes for Sekou and for Clayton. And then the great karmic energies have returned for others that provided kind quotes for you here today. And last but not least, I want to thank you as a fan for sitting down with me for the last 2 hours for this interview. I was able to ask all these questions that I've had for a very long time, and it means a lot to me. So thank you, Ken.
Well, Joel, thank you very much. Thank you for having me on the show, and thanks for reaching out when you're doing interviews with other people. It was neat to be able to sort of think about them for a moment. It's always good to be flagged of the memory of friends. So thanks for that as well.
You're very welcome. And to our listeners, to the Ken fans, to the Thornley fans, to the Watchmen fans, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Joel.
If you've enjoyed today's episode of the podcast, please take a moment to subscribe, like, comment, and share. What I want to know is, who would you like me to sit down with next for a 2-hour deep dive interview? You can let me know by reaching out to me on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel. And you can find me on Twitter and Snapchat at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.